For question number 10, we want to find some values of some inverse trig functions. The sine inverse of the square root of 2 over 2, that should be equal to pi over 4. When working with the inverse trig functions, by the way, it's always important to keep in mind the range of those functions. Remember, the range for sine inverse, it goes from negative pi over 2 to positive pi over 2. The angle in that range, whose sine has a value of the square root of 2 over 2, would be that first quadrant angle, pi over 4. If we look at part B, the cosine inverse of negative radical 3 over 2, keep in mind that the range for the cosine inverse goes from 0 to pi. We need to find the angle in that range whose cosine has the value negative radical 3 over 2. Obviously, that's going to be an angle in quadrant 2. We know that in the first quadrant, the angle whose cosine has value radical 3 over 2 would be pi over 6. And the angle in quadrant 2, whose first quadrant angle, reference angle would be pi over 6, is going to be the angle 5 pi over 6. So the cosine inverse of negative radical 3 over 2 is 5 pi over 6. We now come to the tangent inverse. It has a range very similar to that of sine inverse. It goes from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, where neither of those would be included because this tangent would be undefined there. We know that in the first quadrant, the tangent is equal to 1 at pi over 4. Therefore, the tangent inverse of negative 1 would be the negative pi over 4. It would be this angle here.